Where We're From highlights the rich textures, histories, and experiences of the Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi American community. Each episode is produced by students at San Jose State University.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to another podcast episode from the Weebs. I am your host today, CJ Nguyen, followed by.
My name's Andrew Gong.
I'm Christopher Guzman.
And I'm Everett Wu.
And I'm Daniel Martinez.
And we are the Team Weebs. So, our past episode, we talked about, the Asian Americans and gold mines. And our second episode, we will be talking about, tariffs and how they affect the economy, how they affect Asian Americans and the Asian countries. And our title is Beyond the Borders, Tariffs and the Communities They Hurt. Today's goal is to inform people of the lasting effects of tariffs on communities and that rely on imports of goods for their culture and food. Also, how tariffs affect investment within the communities affected by the tariffs. So, for the first talking point, I will start off by answering what are tariffs and who are getting tariffs. So tariffs are tax imposed by the government on imported goods and services. So basically, it's like putting a price tag on foreign products that make them more expensive. So since the government is raising these tariffs on things being imported into the USA, companies are raising their prices in order to make their money back. So the reason why we are doing this, for some reason, by President Trump, according to the BBC website, it states he wants to reduce the gap between the values of goods the U.S. buys from other countries and those it sells to them. He argues that America has been taken advantage of by cheaters and pillaged by foreigners. In my honest opinion, I understand why he is doing that because he doesn't want to get used by these foreign companies. But I don't think it's the best for both U.S. economy and the foreign economies because it causes the prices to be more for the consumers and companies. So, which leads to people not wanting to pay for these items or goods because they're priced very high, and it pushes a lot of like consumers away, and a lot of companies like fall because of that. Now I'll be answering who is getting tariffed. So tariffs affects a lot of people, but mostly affects regular shoppers, importing businesses, because they have to pay the tariffs in order to import it into the US, and as well as companies and local companies because they pay more to the government in order to get their items. So that means they also have to raise their prices to gain their profit back. Uh, I don't think, or I don't really want to go to the store and pay more about, like because of what's happening with the government and other, countries. I don't think it's fair for US citizens to pay more than what we should be getting. And like for example, things in manufactured in China, which is like a lot of things in store, like in the Walmarts, toys are getting like, you know, uh, tariffed a lot, and it causes more, like price fluctuation. So now I will be passing it on to Daniel, who will be talking about cultural impact and economic invisibility.
Thank you, CJ Land, for passing that on to me. Okay, we're going to be talking about the cultural impact and economic invisibility of the tariffs imposed. So the cultural disconnect from these tariffs, they actually limit to essential cultural foods and goods, traditional ingredients, clothing, or religious items, forcing communities to alter or abandon cultural practices. And with the act of tariffs, the loss of generational traditions happen. When key imported items become too expensive, younger generations grow up without full access to their heritage, leading to a gradual loss of identity. And with this, of course, the dilution of authenticity. Restaurants and markets may substitute or stop offering traditional items, which erodes the authenticity of cultural cuisine and experiences. So I'm going to pass it on to Chris Guzman.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm gonna dive a little bit more into more of the economic points, with these tariffs and everything like that. But one of the big things is how like kind of who these tariffs affect. Mainly it being the immigrants, working class, and like ethnic enclaves. They're typically like excluded from trade policy discussions and economic relief efforts. And this is all coming from Cecile Murray and Alan Barub. And it's shown through their oopsie. It's shown through their research that there's a big lack of data and representation, mainly within like the economic value of cultural economies. Things like the ethnic food markets, import shops, like Danny was talking about, how there's a big loss in generational traditions. A lot of this stuff is understudied and very much undercounted, which typically leads to the policies that kind of ignore their needs. This kind of all really plays into like the invisible struggles with this as well. With tariffs being hit, the hardship faced by these communities, like bring higher food prices, and especially with like a lot of these immigrants who come in, hoping to start a new life, maybe even opening up their own businesses. These tariffs and these higher prices really make it hard for them, and typically lead to a lot of businesses being lost. This is all really like pretty rarely covered in mainstream media, which makes the suffering, practically invisible. We also talk about this, how these tariffs can stunt development as well. With higher import costs, they drive away outside investors and make it riskier for cultural entrepreneurs to expand or open new businesses, which kind of tied back to my last point. With a lot of immigrants coming here hoping to start a new life, it makes it just a whole lot harder for them. And that comes from Min Zhao and Jennifer Lee and their ethnic enclaves and the economic success of immigrants. Now, tariffs also can widen the economic gap between mainstream markets and ethnic communities, which typically already are struggling for capital and infrastructure. And this typically leads to a big loss of opportunities, such as communities with like rich cultural potential are typically overlooked because of the economic instability that is typically created from unpredictable trade costs. And this is all coming from the UCITC publication. So now
Okay.
I'll pass this on to
Um,
Everett as well.
yeah, thank you, Chris. So expanding on the economic effects of this tariff, according to the CSIS, or the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the exports and the trade between US and China decreased from 661.5 billion in 2018 to 582.4 billion in 2024. Since the tariff war increased, with the US raising the tariff to 145%, 16 million jobs in China are at risk. The US is the largest buyer of Chinese produced goods, some of them mass produced for major companies, actually. And this makes up for 15% of all of China's export revenue, meaning that a lot of workers at the bottom to produce these goods could see their jobs at risk.
And right now I'm gonna talk about, the final talking point that we're gonna have and the investment in Asian communities. So with how tariffs, how tariffs work, how do you think the tariffs are gonna affect how investors look into whom they want to invest in? Uh, says inside of NPR, states that now imports from the Philippines are expected to be hit with a 17% new tariff. Rice and coconut milk at her store is gonna cost in Thailand is gonna will be subject to a 36% tariff. So how do you think the Asian communities are going to be impacted by these tariffs? How many Asian goods do you think are going to be impacted, and by how much cost do you think how much increase in cost do you think they're going to be? How much do you think the cost of living is going to be affected to them due to these increases? Now, it might be a bit small for some people, but then for small businesses, the tariffs on Asian goods are going to have it so that they become much more expensive and harder to run their businesses while looking for new ways to find these ingredients. So for Sephora, they state that it would take at least 3 years, if not more, to build a new factory where they could overlook the fact where it's enough to craft traditional, like where craft is traditional. Where else in the country do you think it's where you could find people who have traditional kind of handy makers, right? Where in Asia do you think you could find that? And on average, they need 30 people to work on a piece of jewelry. So not only do they have to be really skilled, they need plenty of them to work with. So overall, these tariffs have disrupted supply chains, which leads to delays and shortages for essential products, and have led to a combination of higher cost and supply issues, which strain many Asian-owned businesses and force them to either downsize or close completely due to them not being able to resource any kind of goods that they need to run. So as an investor looking into wanting to invest in the Asian American community, with these new tariffs, how do you think they're gonna look at the investments? They're obviously not gonna look at it. And then I'm gonna go to Everett to, finish out this conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. So, what would you buy in a grocery store? How many of these products are produced in Asian countries? And with the tariffs, how much more might these products cost? Our So for our reflection questions, how do you think the tariffs have affected our communities today? Chris?
The tariffs like affected like everyone, not just just the communities, like everyone in the business industry. But it's like, imagine you are like not like the best financially, and like you see like these things getting raised up, and like you just want to go to the store and buy like a kid a toy, but like you can't because like they raise the prices way too much where you can't afford it. So like it's just affecting these communities because like it's making things like not as affordable as it used to be.
Yeah, certainly I think that's true. Our second question, do you think these tariffs are fair and just?
To be honest, when I first heard about tariffs, I had no idea what tariffs were. But as I researched more and more about this, I realized that it was actually worse for the consumers and less for the companies. So actually, everything was going to be way more expensive. And to be honest, I get what they're trying to get to with the tariffs. They're trying to build their economy. They're trying to build their companies up inside their own country. But it also like negatively affects the consumers who are buying these goods, like all this clothing, these fresh produce, these vegetables, these fruits. They're being imported from like these different other countries, for example, China. And honestly, I really do think it's really unfair, especially for the middle class and working class, who already does not have a lot of money to spend. So honestly, this is really unjust and like really unfair for the whole like US population and China population.
Yeah, I agree, certainly. Adding on to that though, I would like to place more emphasis on the working class in China. I understand that even prior to the tariff war, they're already having a pretty harsh life now with their products being taxed, with their exports decreasing. Yeah, I think it's a very unfair situation for them. And for our last question, in the short term or long term, do you think it is good for the economy?
I think in both short and long term, it's gonna have a negative effect. We're already seeing the negative effect right now, with the LA docks and SF docks just having no ships inside of it. You can really tell that there's now like a shortage in Asian goods. And I feel like we're gonna be seeing this for a long term unless, China and the US find a way to like, bite off this kind of tariffing that they're having with each other.
All right, anything else to add?
Yeah, I feel like in the short term, everyone's going to be affected, obviously. No, there's like no question about that. But for the long term, we're just going to have to wait and see for the tariffs to like fully settle in, see how the companies react, see how the consumers react, and see how the cost of goods rise up or decrease in the near future. So for the long term, we have no idea. So we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's true.
And to wrap
Well, thank you for listening. This is Team Weebs signing off.
Team Weebs signing off.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Booyah.
Mhm.
Thank you for listening to Where We're From. This podcast is produced by students enrolled in Dr. Joanne Rondilla's Asian American Studies courses at San Jose State University.